You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. In the second part of our conversation, Ruth and I discussed the strange behaviour of animals, some hair-raising Ouija board experiences, along with a preview of some of the new stories from our soon-to-be-released These Haunted Times, Volume 5. And as always, it's a pleasure speaking with Ruth. But before we rejoin Ruth, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mystriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. Thank you to each and every one of you that support the show with your monthly contributions. Mysteries and Monsters is across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for news and episodes. Please visit our exclusive merchandise site through TeePublic, and the link is in the show notes as usual. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. Now let's rejoin Ruth to hear more stories from her haunted life. Going back to what you said about the badgers, I mean, that's fascinating anyway. I mean, did the badger leave paw prints then, Ruth, next to your footprints?
Yeah.
So it was obviously a physical, but like you say, it's just acting very odd. I'm not aware of, and you mentioned about the like elephants, they go somewhere, but I have seen there are stories about both foxes and badgers, and most of it's anecdotal because apparently people just haven't studied this, that both are supposed to bury their dead, which for animals is almost unheard of. And there was a lot of reports, strangely, from your neck of the woods, in sort of the early 90s and stuff, that people were recording seeing strange things like badgers dragging dead badgers off roads. Even though they'd passed, they would drag them essentially out of the way to pass away peacefully or whatever. But also, I know one lady wrote, I'm trying to remember where I read this, and she was walking to work one day and unfortunately she saw a dead badger on the roadside. And then when she came back from work, later it had got quite dark, and she noticed there had been some leaves put over this badger, which she thought was peculiar. And then the following morning she came in, and more leaves were on it. But where she was walking, there were no trees for these leaves. So something had to come and put these leaves over this corpse of the badger from somewhere. And so they were convinced that the only thing that would do such a thing would be other badgers.
That's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
I'd really want to set a camera up and see what was happening there, wouldn't you?
Yes. I mean, it's one of those, there's other stories about them. They will bury dead badgers in like a tomb inside a set. There's anecdotal evidence of finding skeletons of badgers in sets in like a special room and things. And I think it's one of those things, these aspects of nature, same with foxes, that I think we take them for granted unless we're really, really specialising in specific mammals in the UK, and therefore often there are going to be creatures in this country, and I'm sure it's the same all around the world, Ruth, for domestic animals, depending on whereabouts you are in the world. They will have personal quirks and they will do things that to us will blow our mind because they seem to do things that would show a level of intelligence we often get told in the modern world that animals can't possess, from whichever side of the angle it wants to come at, be it a religious soul perspective or a scientific intelligence perspective. And yet time and again we hear all kinds of incredible stories where animals react or behave in a way that we would akin that to be a level of human intelligence. One of my favourite stories is that elephant that saved that girl from the tsunami in Thailand. Just ran off with her into the jungle, and a family chased the elephant because they were like, hang on a minute, where are you going with our daughter? And by the time they realised and caught up with it and got it, where they'd been sat on the beach had been completely decimated. Everybody else on that beach had been killed.
Yeah.
So.
And there's a lot of accounts of that, isn't it? Just before tsunamis hit.
Yes.
Of animals suddenly running for higher ground. which, to be fair, was probably all that elephant was actually doing, rather than specifically trying to save the little girl.
Oh, yeah.
It was, running for higher ground for itself, sort of thing. But how do they know it's coming? They have a level of awareness because they have a different set of senses than we do.
Absolutely.
We tend to forget, we live with domestic dogs. They see in a different colour spectrum to us, don't they? Which is, I notice with my dog that if I buy the wrong colour ball for him to play with, he has a harder time finding it.
Yes.
Because he can't see it against the grass.
Yeah.
So he has to go just by sniff.
Yeah.
And you forget that things have a different experience of the world than you do. Like they've worked out that pigeons can sense where the sun is.
Yes.
And that's how they do their, homing, is all to do with, electromagnetic fields around the earth and the sun's output and what have you.
Yeah.
Because they have a sense that we simply don't have. So it's hard for us to even perceive how that works. Or echolocation in bats, or, and on and on and on. There's all these different senses that are out there. So why aren't some of these older stories also true about having that better awareness of the sense around you? Why not have a storm elemental that is a thing that actually exists? Why not have a badger that did on that occasion? And it was a living badger. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting it was a paranormal badger. It was living. It was just behaving very oddly for a badger to let a little girl walk along with her hand on its back for the whole length of a big garden. Yeah.
I mean, like you said, though, they are renowned for being elusive. They're far more elusive, especially around here. The foxes don't give a monkeys around here.
No.
I've seen more foxes than watching the Fantastic Mr. Fox film. I think the amount of times I could literally walk out of my home at any point after about 10 o'clock at night when it's dark, and it would probably take me about 10 minutes till I see a fox dashing about.
Yeah.
And I get really annoyed at all these people. Well, I'm not really annoyed. I'm very jealous, actually. All these people in the local area, they've all got like garden cameras and stuff, and there's badgers all over the place. Never seen one, 3.5 years. And then the other day, I went outside about 11 o'clock, and clearly somebody had put something in a bin and just let their lid shut, their big bin.
Yeah.
And then the next thing, I saw these two chunky things just appear and shoot down the street like sprinters, Ruth. And the first thing I thought was, why is there a pair of corgis running down the road? And then I realised, because I could hear the claws on the pavement, it was that loud, they were running that fast. It was a pair of badgers who'd been mucking about and been startled by this going off. First time I've seen them in nearly 4 years.
And apart from that one occasion, as a child, I've never seen a badger in the wild. And yet, like I say, I live within a mile of a badger set.
Yeah.
Here. And I've only ever seen them dead on the side of the road, other than that one that walked with me as a kid. And obviously I've seen them on telly and what have you, but I've never actually seen one in the wild.
Yeah.
Because they really are quite elusive creatures, considering their size.
Yes.
I mean, they're flipping big things, but they are very good at being elusive. But that one, for whatever reason, either decided I wasn't a threat, or it was past caring, or who knows, but it let me walk along with my hand on its back. And I just thought it was a dog with a stripy face because I was only little. And, to this day, I wouldn't have known it was a badger, except my mum came out and found the prints of it. And because she's a country lass, she knew they were badger prints. Yeah. So it was definitely a badger.
I mean, what I've also gathered from your life, Ruth, is I'm just wondering how many times you can have an experience on a Ouija board where you think, actually, bugger this.
I can tell you how many times you can have an experience on a Ouija board and then think, bugger this, and it's exactly 4 times. When you think, I'm never touching another damn Ouija board again in my life, and I will not touch one now.
Yes.
I do go on ghost hunts where they have a Ouija board, and I'm pretty famous for saying, no, not touching it. And that's because all my experiences with them have been bad.
Yeah.
And that's just a personal experience. I'm not expressing a view on whether people should do them or not. That's entirely up to people's individual choices. But for me personally, the 4 times I can remember doing a Ouija board has always been bad. So the first time that I can remember, I must have been ever so little because it was in Leeds, and I think I was only about 6 or 7 when we moved out of Leeds. So I must have been ever so little. And I remember my sister was playing with a girl who was a bit older than her, who lived just up the road. And they let me tag along this particular day because they wanted to do a Ouija board. So they needed more than just the 2 of them. and we went into the garden shed in this girl's garden, and she'd smuggled one of her mum's best glasses, wine glasses, out of the house, and she'd created a Ouija board on an upturned board sat on top of a stool with just letters written on bits of paper laid out to make the alphabet in a circle round the edge of the board so that the glass could theoretically move and touch the letters and spell out. And we all put our fingers on it, the three of us, and she started asking all these questions. And I remember being scared, half silly, because I didn't really understand what we were doing or why we were doing it, but it was all very secret and hush-hush, and her mum mustn't know that we'd stolen this glass. And I remember her asking it whether God exists, and then the glass started just whizzing round and round and round in a circle, with us trying desperately to keep our fingers on it as it just went faster and faster. And eventually we just couldn't keep up with it, and we all had to take our fingers off. You just couldn't keep up with the movement. It was going so fast. And it went about another 1.5 revolutions, and then just made up enough momentum to just fling itself off the board completely and smash against the wall. And the biggest takeaway I took from that at the time, bearing in mind I was so little, was, oh my God, we're for it now. We've smashed our mum's glass.
Yes.
You know, and it was only in later years when you look back and think, oh, that was actually a bit bad.
Yes.
Because I was way too little to understand what we were doing at that point. You know, this girl was quite a bit older. She must have been, I would guess, 10 or 12 at that point, when I was probably about 5 or 6. And I just remember being absolutely terrified that we were going to be in trouble for this smashed glass. And we were in trouble for the smashed glass. We got into a lot of trouble for that. So that was my earliest memory of one. And it was a bad memory because of the smashed glass rather than a paranormal feeling, because I was too young to attribute that side of it at that point. But then we moved to Suffolk, and from Suffolk we moved to Wylde in Hertfordshire.
Yeah.
Which was the house I've talked about in the past that had the poltergeist.
Yes.
And we were now of the kind of age where kids think Ouija boards are a good idea to play with, which is around about the 12, 13, 14 kind of age in the UK for some reason, don't know, but it certainly was back then.
Yes.
Everybody had a go.
Rite of passage.
Yeah, it pretty much was. And you usually did it with Scrabble letters, didn't you? You know, the letters after your Scrabble game.
We used to show off. The one I built for everybody was done on a mirror.
Oh, you show off.
We were just trying to freak each other out, Ruth, I think.
I think ours was done on half of a Monopoly board, folded in such a way that the crease down the middle of the Monopoly board wasn't in the way.
Yes.
And then Scrabble letters put round to form the letters and what have you. And so we were in Welling, and our next door neighbours were 2 girls, similar sort of age as me and my sister. And they came over, and it was a bit of a miserable afternoon, Saturday afternoon. We were bored, and we decided to do a Ouija board. So we sat in mine and my sister's bedroom on the floor, on the carpet, with this set up in front of us. And we're all asking questions, because by this age we're understanding you're meant to ask and a ghost will answer. So we've got that understanding about Ouija boards now. And nothing was happening. It was just sitting there, absolutely stationary, no matter what we asked, what we did. And then it suddenly started moving. I think we just asked, are you here? Is there a spirit here with us? Where are you? And it started moving, and we all immediately started accusing each other of you're pushing it, and it spelled out the words Big Ted. One letter at a time.
Yeah. And
as it got to the D at the end of Big Ted, my teddy bear fell off the shelf behind us.
Ooh.
And my teddy bear's name was Big Ted. And we were freaked beyond freakness. because it had just spelled out Big Ted's name and Big Ted fell off the shelf behind us. And we just asked it, where are you? I was scared of that, but I've still got the bear, funnily enough. He's in my bedroom now. But I was scared of him for quite a few years in case he had a ghost in him. So that wasn't much fun. We did try it a second time, about a week or so later, and literally nothing was happening, no matter what we asked. And we eventually got bored and just sat back and started chatting. And about 10 minutes after we left it alone, the glass suddenly moved about 3 inches across the board on its own. At which point we all screamed and ran out of the room.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much the end of me wanting to touch Ouija boards, because, you know, these not good things. I grew up, I left home, I had my first marriage. My first marriage split up, and because I had nowhere to go straight away until I could sort myself out, I went to stay at the flat in Redbourne where my brother was renting the flat. And of course he's 5 years younger than me, so I was 23 at the time, so he would have been sort of 18.
Yes.
So all his mates were sort of 18, 19, 20. I was the oldest one of the bunch at 23.
Yeah.
And this particular evening, his mates had all come round, and it was a weird flat. It was in a very, 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 very old building, built in, I think, the early 1700s. And it was a shop downstairs, an antique shop, and the flat was the flat above the shop. And you got to the flat by walking up an outside set of stairs at the back and walking across the flat roof of the new extension of the shop below, and then in through the door to the actual building. And we had, you know, the second floor of the building was the flat, and the loft area had been converted into another bedroom, but it was such a small, tight room that when you went up the stairs to get into it, as you got to the top of the stairs, you had to bend over double and crawl into the bedroom because there wasn't enough space between the eaves and the staircase for you to stand up. So that upstairs bedroom was this awful, cramped, tiny little, almost like a tent-shaped room because you were in the literal roof space.
Yes.
And, you know, you could only get into it by crawling off these stairs. And it had one tiny little window that was about 6 inches by 8 inches. And that was the only natural light. It was a horrible little room. And that's where I was staying until I could sort something out after splitting up with my first husband.
Yeah.
Anyway, this particular evening, all his mates have come round. And, of course, I'm pretty fed up because I'm older than them and I've already been married and settled, and they're still at that partying Wylde stage.
Yes. Damn them.
I'm over that, you know. And they decide they're going to do a Ouija board. So Ruth says, I'm out. I tap out at this point. I'm not taking any part of this. I'm off to bed. So I left them downstairs in the lounge, which is obviously directly below this room up in the eaves that I'm sleeping in. My pet cat that I had at the time was in there with them. And they start doing a Ouija board. I, in the meantime, have gone to bed. Normal bedtime routine, probably read a few pages of a book, snuggled up, was falling asleep. Fell asleep, started to have a dream, and I absolutely definitely was a dream. That particular day, I'd been down at the RSPCA that I sometimes volunteered at, and I'd been helping them with this Afghan hound puppy who'd come in, who'd been so badly treated, it was agoraphobic. And we were working with it to try and break the agoraphobia, which meant you used to get it out of its kennel, walk a few steps with it, be all excited because it was a puppy, and it was, you know, a very big puppy with being an Afghan hound, but nevertheless a puppy.
Yeah.
Be all excited and bouncing about, and then it would realise you'd taken it out of its kennel, and it would instantly hit the ground and cower because it was terrified. And what we were doing was you would turn a circle back towards the kennel. So you sort of walk around the front of this dog that was prone on the ground shaking. It would realise you were now facing back to the kennel and would immediately jump up and start bolting back for the kennel. So you'd walk with it, let it bolt a few steps back towards the kennel, and then turn a circle again round the front of it. And it would take it a minute or so to realise you were no longer heading for the kennel before it hit the deck again, and we were just doing this over and over again to try and, acclimatise it to being outside.
Yeah.
Which is what the trainers had said we were to do. And I went to sleep thinking about this day that I'd spent with this puppy, trying to get it to walk. So as I fell asleep, I started dreaming about that puppy. And the dream was at first about the puppy, and then all of a sudden this little girl came walking up in the dream, which hadn't happened in reality, it was just in the dream. And she was literally dressed like one of those little Alice in Wonderland type pictures of a little girl. Lovely, long, Goldilocks type, ringlets, bow in her hair, little blue dress with a bow at the back and a little apron thing at the front, little black shoes. Typical sweet little innocent child from the 1800s or early 1900s type picture that you see on chocolate boxes and things all over England.
Yeah.
And she walked up to me and she smiled at me with the sweetest, innocent little cherub face and her little gold ringlets. And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, "What's the name of the puppy, missus?" And I smiled back at her and I looked down at the dog and I was about to say the actual name of the dog when something warned me that if I tried to speak its name, the wrong name was going to come out and it would unleash something horribly evil. And this dog was looking back up to me with the most evil look on its face you could imagine.
Yeah.
And I screamed. And in screaming, I woke myself up.
Right.
And I woke up and went, oh, what a horrible dream. Oh, that was nasty. And at that point, I hear them all screaming downstairs. So, and one of them comes running to the bottom of these weird little stairs, like, "Are you all right? Are you all right?" Yeah. Just, "Why are you screaming?" "I just had a dream. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Oh my God, you frightened the hell out of us with a flipping Ouija board." And at that point, I remembered they're doing this blimmin' Ouija board. Anyway, I went downstairs to see why they were all so upset. And it turned out that just before I screamed myself awake, they had asked the Ouija board to tell them its name because something was responding. It had started to respond and was spelling something out when the cat, who was in the room with them, suddenly started running around the room like it was doing a wall of death.
Yeah.
Like halfway up the walls, and repeatedly flung itself against the door to try and get out.
Oof.
So one of them had stood up to open the door before the cat brained itself.
Yeah.
And as they stood up to open the door, it was just spelling out its name when I screamed myself awake because something evil was about to say its name.
Oh.
And that freaked the heck out of me, I have to say. And solidified even more my absolute determination not to have anything to do with Ouija boards. Unfortunately for me, of course, this became a legend in amongst him and his mates.
Yes.
That this had happened, that the Ouija board had been about to tell them its name, and the cat went mad and Ruth started screaming upstairs.
Yep.
So we didn't stay at that flat very long. We moved into another rented property in Luton just a few weeks after this, and they all wanted to do a Ouija board again because it was so exciting the last time they did one. Idiots.
Yeah.
So this time they're all drunk, I'm sober, I'm sitting there going, no, we can do something else other than a Ouija board. I'm sober, let's go out and see a haunted church or something, if you want to do something exciting. Let's not do no, nothing would persuade them they were going to do a Ouija board.
Yeah.
So I'm left there, stone cold sober, with all these drunk idiots wanting to do a Ouija board. And I'm thinking, well, I daren't leave the flipping room this time because I don't want it waking me up trying to tell me its demon name in the middle of mid-blooming dreams on my own upstairs. So I was too scared to leave the room and too scared to stay in the room. So I ended up saying, well, all right, but I'm not coming anywhere near it and I'm not touching it. And you do it over that side of the room and I'm staying over this side of the room. So I refused point blank to touch it. But in the end, they persuaded me that a good idea would be if they called out what it was spelling and I wrote it down so as they could all have their fingers on the glass. And I sort of thought about that. I thought, I can't see any harm with that. Famous last words.
Absolutely.
So they all start asking it questions. and it's moving, and they're getting a little bit of answers, nothing much. And then I can't for the life of me remember what question they asked it, but it started to move quite quickly, pointing out letter after letter after letter. And they were all drunk, and they were all sort of, oh, you're pushing. No, I'm not. You're pushing it. And I'm staying quiet, hoping they'll get bored with it. But I'm faithfully writing down each letter they call out. And I don't say a word through any of this. I keep my mouth firmly buttoned until eventually they get bored, because they're calling out these letters and they can't see that it's making any sense at all. It just seems to be random letters. So they get bored. They stop doing it. They open a few more bottles of beer. I say to them, right, you're bored with it now. Yeah. Are you going to put it away? Yeah. So they put all the Scrabble letters back in the Scrabble box, put the board away, put everything away. And at that point I said, right, now that you've put it away and it's not coming back out, I'll tell you what it spelled out. Because the only person in this room who can speak Latin is me, because I did Latin A-level. And I'm not touching it. And it had done a whole paragraph in Latin.
Wow.
So that cannot possibly have been any of them pushing it. Because
just making something up as well, Ruth. You wouldn't. No, that's too much of a coincidence.
Yeah. And it wasn't even high quality Latin. It was the kind of Latin you'd get in medieval England, a bit bastardized. So it was even hard for me, because I did, obviously kind of proper Latin. We're doing Latin A-level. So I could follow it, but I struggled for a little while to translate it, because it was the kind of more the pidgin Latin rather than high quality Latin, if you like. But the sentence that they got as far at went something like, I can't quite remember because I didn't keep it anywhere, sadly, but it went something like, at the bottom of the hill, at the end of the meadow, there stands a tree where the goddess Sulis, and that's as far as they got. So it's a whole paragraph in Latin that made sense, that they had no idea they were spelling out, because they don't speak Latin. Or read Latin, rather. Nobody speaks Latin, but read Latin.
Yes.
So now you know why I won't take Ouija boards. I don't like them.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I would put a conservative estimate of probably, I don't know, 300-400 sessions over the years. I haven't done one for a very long time, and most of it was just people mucking about, Ruth. But even so, I've not done it for like 30 years. There are still a handful of occasions where my blood run cold due to what was going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm deeply cynical. I think a lot of it. But I think when you start having weird things like that kind of take it above the usual involuntary muscle reaction that is often used to dismiss it, I think a lot of it is over-egged and sometimes perhaps exaggerated, or people create a scenario. But I think when you have occasions like you've just mentioned there, where you've got layer on layer on layer that takes it above somebody mucking about, or it's just being somebody totally controlling the conversation or whatever. When I think other things happen, or objects start to move around it and nobody's doing it, or animals start acting very oddly, that for me takes it to a different level. I think you just maybe, as we've covered for the previous 90 minutes, Ruth, I think whether you like it or not, there's always something near you.
I rather suspect so. You can see why I'm so fascinated with it, because for me, and not just because of my own experiences, but because of all the people I talk to and all the witnesses I interview and everything, it's no longer a question of, do you believe in the paranormal? It's a question of, what the hell is causing all this stuff that's going on?
Yes.
Because, when you invited me to come on tonight, and I thought, what should we talk about? I know we've never talked about my own experiences at length. That might be interesting. And I actually sat down for the first time and wrote a list of them. And actually I shortened the list because I was thinking, we've only got an hour or two to talk here.
Yeah.
So there are other things that aren't on the list I sent to you. And it's only when you look at the list and you think, wow, I really have had quite a lot of experiences over the years. I was aware I'd had experiences, but I hadn't really ever sat down and looked at them as a list before. And it really does drive home. It's no wonder that so many of us are fascinated by it, because there comes a point where you just have to be interested in it if you keep bumping into it, or it keeps bumping into you, depending on how you want to look at that. But
yes,
it's just around all the time, isn't it?
It is. I often find it remarkable on occasions where the people's experiences I like the most are the people I've known who know me and know what I'm interested in, and they're not interested in it at all, or just think it's a load of stuff and nonsense, Ruth. And so I can think of 2 occasions where 2 people have had paranormal encounters of very different persuasions. One just basically said, yeah, something really strange has happened, never wanted to talk about it again. The other one dismissed it as being a draft, even though his entire story clearly wasn't a draft. There was moving around. I've never seen a draft that moves around you like a scarf that's come alive, Ruth.
No.
Going through his legs and under each arm and around his head and back out, and then back out through the door, and you could hear it. No, that's not a draft, but that's how he wanted it to be. Because
he doesn't want to face it. Yeah.
Precisely. And then, we get a lot of, stories. I mean, this is the thing, we're not talking about terrifying entities sitting on your chest, smacking you around the face. Some of these are quite pleasant experiences. Some would say even magical or special, especially when you have the animal ones. And as you know, I'm a sucker for an animal ghost of any persuasion, be it a squirrel, a pigeon, or an elephant. It doesn't really matter to me. I like all of them. And I think sometimes when we have a history of strange occurrences, like you say, sometimes you don't realise how many odd things you've experienced until you take the time, even for people like us, Ruth, to write them down in a list. And I think once you get past 4 or 5, you begin to think, hang on, what's going on here?
Yeah, there's a bit much here.
Yes.
But don't you think there's an element as well of, if in general life you decide, I want to buy a nice pair of high-heeled blue sandals. Sake of argument, you might not, but, a person in general might think.
You never know.
You never know. And all power to you if you want to.
Well, yes, it wouldn't be the first time I've worn heels.
That's a story for another time.
Most of mine are.
But, from that moment onwards, when you make the decision, you suddenly see blue high-heeled sandals everywhere you look, don't you?
Yes.
They're on adverts on the telly. You see a lady walking past in some, like the ones you wanted. They're suddenly in shop windows, and suddenly they're everywhere. Or if you decide, I think I'm going to buy a car and I fancy a yellow Golf, suddenly everywhere you look is yellow Golfs.
Yes.
And I think there's something about when you settle into your mind about something, your brain then stops filtering that noise out and starts paying attention to it. Because we all know, from scientific, exploration of these things, the human brain at any given moment in time is taking on board a million different little bits of information.
Yes.
So it's paying attention to what your own body's doing. Are you hungry? Are you hot? Are you cold? Is your back hurting? It's paying attention to all of that. It's paying attention to what you're touching. Is my hand hot, safe, soft, hard? What's under my fingertips?
Yep.
It's taking in what your eyes are looking at and acknowledging all that information at once, which can be a million bits of data right there. And it's taking in everything your ears are hearing at the same time. And at any given moment, your brain, unbeknownst to you, is filtering out the vast majority of that data input.
Yes.
And supplying you with only the bit you need for what you're doing at that moment. Because otherwise we'd all sit there like basket cases, completely overwhelmed with a million bits of data at once.
Yes.
So the human brain is designed to do that. It has to do that. And I think that sometimes when you decide you're going to have those blue sandals or that yellow car, your brain stops filtering out the fact that it's just spotted a pair of blue sandals or a yellow car, and it lets that piece of data in. And I think the paranormal is sometimes the same. When you're like me or you and you start taking an interest in it, your brain stops filtering it out and starts pointing out to you all the weird little anomalies going on around you. And suddenly you start to see more, hear more, and experience more than before.
Yeah.
Because I think your brain has stopped filtering it out.
Yes. I've got an intriguing example of that. So, 15 years ago, me and my partner at the time went to stop with some friends at their caravan outside of Hornsea here in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
And so we got there Friday evening, got some beers, lovely summer's evening, sat outside with the dogs, chilling out. We'd had a bit of a barbecue, having a drink. We were talking about something. And we ended up talking about I was a very precocious child, as you may gather, Ruth, having spoken to me several times over the years. I think it's still quite evident. But I was obsessed with B movies and monster films when I was like 6, 7, 8. All the Universal films, Godzilla, I loved it. So I watched lots of really bad films. And this one particular morning, this'll date it, I was watching TVAM on a Saturday morning. And they'd got this gentleman on called Harry Medved. And Harry Medved and his brother created what was called the Golden Turkey Awards in the 1970s in the States. And it was essentially, it's what grew into the Raspberry Awards, for rubbish films these days. And so he was on, they'd written a book about the Golden Turkey Awards, about the worst films ever made. And I was amazed. And apparently, and so I thought, well, what I want to do is I want to ring up, because you could ring up in those days and ask a question. And so I rang up and I spoke to this chap, and he was very nice, and he was fascinated the fact that a 10-year-old was really interested in bad films, I think. And so we were talking about, what's your favourite, what do you think's the worst film ever made? And at the time he said it's Plan 9 from Outer Space, which I can categorically say now, 40 years on, I've seen a lot worse than Plan 9 from Outer Space. And usually with people spending a lot more money on films, Ruth. But we were talking about this, and they were laughing about the fact, and I thought I got away with it, but my mum and dad went out for a drink that night, and one of their friends said, "Oh, it was brilliant to hear your son on the TV this morning. I bet you're really proud of him doing so well talking to that guy on TVAM." And they didn't know anything about it. So they came back, they laughed about it, and the fact that, it was like the call cost about 3p or something, so it wasn't an issue. So we were talking about the story, we're all chuckling and laughing and whatever. And so anyway, the day after, we go into Hornsea and we have a nice walk round. So I've told this story about this book. And one of the things I said was, I can't believe I lost that book. I had that book when I was a teenager. I loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. So we were talking about, I said, whatever. Anyway, so we go walking around Hornsea, and after about an hour, we walk past this big charity shop. I think it was an RSPCA shop. And as we walk past, there's a display of books in the window. And which book's smack in the middle for £3?
Oh, wow.
It's the Golden Turkey Awards. And I couldn't... I said, look at that. And the couple that we were with, the guy just went, I can't believe that. And just burst out laughing. He said, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. I've never seen that book in my life. You mentioned it the night before, and there it is for sale, £3. So I ran in and bought it, and I still own it now. But that's one of those strange things. I've never seen that book. I'm a regular charity shop delver, Ruth, for all kinds of clothes, books, weird things, especially the books that we love, because some people don't appreciate them as much as we do.
How dare they?
And which is why I've nearly got 1,000 now, I think.
Oh, good grief.
I don't need to win the lottery for any other reason other than I need a room for my books now.
Yes.
So, and so that kind of situation has always stuck with me, because I've never seen that book for sale in a charity shop ever again. I know you can buy it these days. You can buy anything on like eBay or World of Books or whatever. But I've never seen it for sale in a charity shop. And the fact that I spotted it in a place I'd not been to for 30 years, because we went there a lot when we were kids, on a random trip that was arranged the week before, to see it the day after I'd told this anecdote to the people we were hanging out with, still brings a smile to my face every time I think about it. I'm smiling my head off at the minute because it's just a very strange, happy little story of coincidence, I think.
Yes, yeah, total synchronicity somehow.
Yes, after being caught in an amazing electrical storm, which also terrified the people we were with because they were terrified. I'd never met anybody who was terrified of lightning before.
Do you know, it's usually thunder people are frightened of, isn't it, rather than lightning?
Yeah.
Although I did see St Elmo's fire once, and that's quite eerie to see.
Yes.
And slightly sort of like, ooh.
Yeah.
That was at the Welling House, funnily enough. That was on the lamppost outside the Welling House. We had a big thunderstorm, and we were looking out the window watching the lightning, me and my sister and my mum, because we all loved watching storms. And there was this huge bolt of lightning hit close by somewhere up in the woods, and it was raining hard, and bolts of electricity went running down the road, jumping across the puddles.
Wow.
And then one bit of it went up the post, which was the telegraph post, and just played round the top of it, like a halo of blue electricity. While we all watched it open-mouthed, and it's known as St Elmo's fire. It used to do it on the tall masts of, when ships have masts and sails.
Yeah.
More often known at sea because it's very much associated with there being water and the electricity.
Yes.
But obviously there was enough water running down the road that day to just cause a freak little moment of St Elmo's fire.
Yeah.
So
fascinating, isn't it? It's incredible.
Yeah. Not if you're scared of lightning, though.
No.
I would imagine that would be horrific for that poor person.
I've been on a plane struck by lightning. It was incredible. Everybody else on the plane did not share my experience, Ruth.
You're the only one going, woohoo!
I was just like, whoa! And everybody else around me is like clutching their rosary beads and crying and screaming. And we'd literally just taken off. We'd been in the air 5 minutes coming out of Barcelona. Brilliant. Never seen anything like it in my life. Incredible. And the pilot afterwards had to tell everybody, don't panic. Planes get struck by lightning lots. We are designed to be struck by lightning, which I don't think calmed anybody down. But I just thought, whoa, amazing. Well, before I let you leave, as I teased in your introduction, there is a new volume of These Haunted Times coming soon, Ruth, which is a bit of a departure for your previous work because you've decided to decamp to the other side of the Atlantic. What's going on?
It was just one of those things. It's so daft, really. And I've no idea whether it's going to turn out to have been a good idea or a bad idea yet. But you know how I've mentioned before that as fast as I write one book, because of the methodology I use, where I go out on social media and I try and look for correlations, get people's own accounts, that people are writing back to me constantly and saying, well, I haven't seen anything, at that address or that road or whatever you're asking about, but my house is haunted or my pub is haunted or my wherever is haunted. So when I finished that almighty madness of writing 2 books last year that I've talked about before,
yes,
by accident, didn't mean to, accidentally wrote 2 books, I was left thinking, I'm not sure I can face that database again so soon to see how much it's filled up. And I just got this hankering to look at American ghosts for a change, because I haven't got a database full of American ghosts. I have now, but I didn't have at the start of the year. And I just thought, I wonder if you could use the same methodology to talk to people in America and get their stories and see if it's any different, and see if, the sort of world of paranormal is the same or different, or do they have a different view of it than we do over here? And just do another These Haunted Times, but call this one These Haunted Times Volume 5 - America. So there we are. So I just had to start from the beginning, which kind of made me feel a bit better after being so exhausted from writing 2 books last year, that I had something new to put my teeth into, because I haven't got a database full of American ghosts like I have British ghosts. So I just went out on Google basically and looked for famous, well-known, oft spoken about ghosts in America as a starting point. And then did what I usually do, which is find some social media pages that are close to the location, join those pages or groups or whatever, and then see if they'll let me post a question about, has anybody experienced anything they can't explain in such and such a location? And I have to say I was really nervous at first, because I really didn't know what kind of reception, if any, I would get, whether I'd get deafening silence or a torrent of, keyboard warrior online abuse. And I'm hugely happy to report that so far so good. The Americans are just as happy to talk to somebody about their ghosts as the British are.
Yes.
So I've already interviewed a whole host of witnesses. In fact, one lady who wrote to me about her house, which is haunted, and which you can actually go and visit if you book with her, which is, I think, is particularly interested. It's called the Dilgate House. She actually, I did a video interview with her, and she was kind enough to walk me round the house on video.
Wow.
So as I could get a look at, all the places that things happen in the house. And she's diligently researched all the history of the ghosts, and who lived in the house and who's now haunting it and so on. Absolutely fascinating story. So that will be in the book. But yeah, so people have been really engaging, and I've got some really interesting stories already. So if you would indulge me, I'd quite like to read one of them to you, if that's all right.
Absolutely. Is it either of the two you've mentioned?
It is. It's Bear Creek Swamp in Alabama.
I find it quite odd. We're talking about coincidence. I've heard of both the places you've mentioned in your email to me.
Well, that doesn't entirely surprise me, because I did start out with places that were well known, and then ask for people's own experiences.
Yeah.
But yes, but then you are the encyclopedia of everything paranormal, Paul. Come on, I'd be more surprised if you hadn't heard of it.
I'm not. That's very kind of you. I'm always learning, Ruth. That's me.
Yes,
always learning.
You are incredibly knowledgeable, and I think I'd be much more likely to fall off my chair with surprise if you said, I've never heard of that, Ruth.
Well, I'm not going to say anything else then about Bear Creek, because I'm going to wait and see if what I know about it matches up with what you're about to tell me. I hope it does. That'd be super exciting. So please,
interesting, wouldn't it?
Fire away.
So Bear Creek Swamp in Alabama. So just to read from the book as it will be. I was asking about other areas in Alabama when, as is often the way, a couple of people contacted me about a different location to ask about. So of course I did. Bear Creek Swamp lies a little to the east of, I don't know how you pronounce this, or Taugerville? Not sure how you pronounce that, in Alabama. And as its name suggests, it's a swampy, forested area of land that follows the line of Bear Creek. The actual creek itself is a narrow belt of water, barely distinguishable in places from the swampy land around it. There are a number of winding dirt access roads through it, but there are large tracts of undisturbed wild forest and swamp, so there is certainly plenty of scope for strange things to be lurking within it. A quick internet search will tell you that there are numerous paranormal stories and legends attached to the area. People sometimes hear mysterious booming sounds in the area, with never any explanation that quite fits what they're experiencing. Sometimes ghostly figures have been seen flitting amongst the trees, and legends say that these are the spirits of lost warriors of the Alabama tribes who once claimed this land as theirs to roam. There are spectral lights which flicker and wander amongst the trees, and the tale of a woman who lost a child here many years ago, and whose spirit is doomed to wander the swamps crying out and searching for her missing baby. It's one of those places where teenagers will drive the old roads sometimes, looking for an easy jump scare and egging each other on, but also a place where some people talk in hushed tones about the things that are supposedly experienced. Apparently, if you call "I have your baby" 3 times whilst out in the swamp, the spirit of the bereaved mother will either appear to you or you'll hear her anguished cries. And interestingly, that's not the only place in America that I have that for, that "I have your baby." But I digress. So like all paranormal hotspots, it has also attracted its own share of disbelievers and attempts to debunk the claims. One such answer, in inverted commas, is that the mysterious booms are actually old distilling paraphernalia used to produce moonshine exploding, or in more recent times, meth labs going up in flames.
Yes.
I've even seen one article which said it could be either of these or locals putting a stick of dynamite into a beaver dam to get rid of it. Any of which I think people would know it wasn't a mysterious boom, to be honest.
They all seem like normal explanations. So, yes, that kind of doesn't really answer it. It's just a suggestion, isn't it?
Yes, it's just a suggestion. On the 26th of November 2014, the County Sheriff's Office was reported in the Daily Mail Online to have recovered 21 child's dolls from the swamp, which had been impaled on bamboo stakes and positioned in the swamp in such a way as to be visible from one of the dirt roads which access the area. Each doll was quite antique looking in appearance and was wearing old-fashioned finery. No one knows who put them there, or at least no one's admitting to it, probably afraid of being landed with a clean-up bill, or what the purpose of it was. The Sheriff's Department thought it was probably just a prank, but decided it was prudent to remove them anyway. You can actually see photos of the dolls online, and they are pretty creepy looking, especially if, like me, you find dolls horribly creepy at the best of times. Then Doug Ward got in touch with me, and that's his real name, because he gave me permission to use his real name. And he's part of a paranormal investigation group in Alabama. And he corresponded with me about the legends at Bear Creek and the experiences he and his team had there in approximately 2017. They did several investigations in the area, and each time they would set up a base camp out of which they could safely operate and where they could stow their gear and supplies. They would take a portable generator so that they could power devices and the two-way radios if need be. 2 members of the team always stayed with the gear at base camp, whilst others conducted the investigation. On one particular trip, they decided to try and trigger the sighting or sound of the ghost of the bereaved mother. Doug pointed out that her legend is very reminiscent of a La Llorona type legend, so they were keen to see if they could capture anything relating to the spirit. He described to me an area where there is a trail that leads into the swamp and where they could easily set up a base camp. Having done so, they left his wife and one other team member behind, as per their paranormal group's protocol, and moved out into the swamp proper along the trail. And they'd actually persuaded one of their team, who is actually a large, burly biker-type gentleman, to wear a dress and carry a doll dressed as a small child or baby. And his role was to walk the trail ahead of the investigators, calling out every few minutes, "I have your baby," as per the requirements of the legends. When they set out along the trail, it was late afternoon and dusk was falling, so the sun was setting. The last few rays of light came through the thickly crowded trees and glinted off the swamp water, and their colleague walked slowly ahead of them, clutching the baby and crying out, whilst they used their various handheld electronics to record what was happening around them, in the hopes of catching evidence of something paranormal. They'd walked like this for maybe a mile into the woods, and were regularly radioing back to the base camp to update them of their progress. Suddenly, all around them, in the now almost full dark, fish started jumping out of the water with loud splashes. Doug said it was the strangest thing. It wasn't 1 or 2 fish. There were literally hundreds of fish leaping out of the water all around them, creating a cacophony of splashing sounds and startling them all. And at the same moment, all their two-way radios suddenly died, and they were unable to get in touch with their base camp. Overhead, an ominous black cloud rolled in above them, making the air feel charged like it does just before a thunderstorm. And at the same time, they were suddenly surrounded by huge swarms of black flies, which seemed to come out of the denser swamp areas in waves. And all the while, these fishes were jumping all around them. They began to see shadows moving out amongst the trees, and he said that the feeling of wrongness around them was literally palpable. And they unanimously decided to retreat back to base camp and hurriedly retrace their steps, not bothering to call out anymore. When they got back to base camp, they discovered that all the electronics had died, and that the electronic failure happened at the exact same moment the fish had started jumping. Isn't that fascinating?
Once again, you've got nature reacting to something that nobody else seems to be aware of.
Yeah. And things happening, and even the electronics reacting to it.
Wow. Brilliant. I'm aware of it because of these mysterious booms, because I like these weird cases of mysterious booms, because they're reported from all around the world.
Oh, yeah. I've heard one.
Oh, have you?
Yeah. I was out walking the dogs. This was quite some years ago. I bet this is 15 years ago, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
No, wouldn't be quite that long, because Red's only 10. Maybe 10 years, maybe 9 or 10 years ago then.
Mm-hmm.
And I was walking them out on the fields behind Red. It was before my back problem really became a problem. And I'd walked more or less into the middle of the fields because Red was young and was charging about like a lunatic. And there was a sudden distant boom that really confused me, because normally when you hear a sound, you can tell what direction it's coming from roughly, can't you? And this boom came from everywhere at once. And I literally couldn't tell whether I should be looking up, down, left, right. It would just, it seemed like it was all around. And it was distant. It didn't sound close. There was no thunder, but it almost sounded like a roll of thunder, except it was everywhere. And I just stood there in the middle of this field and thought, that was the oddest thing. I wonder what it was. Anyway, finished walking the dogs, went home, was watching the news a little while later, and they reported that there'd been an earthquake in Cambridgeshire, whose epicentre was only about 15, 20 miles from where I'd been stood at the exact time I heard the boom. So I'm pretty sure it was related to the earthquake.
Well, having been in a very mild earthquake, the thing that's always struck with me was the weird noise I heard before it kicked off, which essentially sounded like an old World War II air raid siren being wound up, like a... And then the next thing, I was over the other side of the office on my office chair as I'd been shaken across the room.
Oh, wow!
And that was here in Sheffield in... Was it 2007, 2008? There was an earthquake at 1 a.m. in Lincolnshire. I think it was 4.9. It's crazy.
I wonder what on earth that sound was, though, because there surely aren't any air raid shelter sirens left in Sheffield from... That's what
pricked my ear. I thought, what on earth is that noise? And then the next thing, everything just started shaking. And because I was on an office chair on wheels, Ruth, I just went, woo!
Off you went.
straight into the opposite corner of the room. I was like, what the hell is happening? Why are we having an earthquake in England? And it was crazy. All the car alarms and burglar alarms were going off. It was madness. And I remember telling a friend of mine who'd just come back from Japan, and he was really annoyed because he'd stayed in Japan a year and hadn't experienced one.
And there's you getting one in Sheffield.
Absolutely, yeah. Woke everybody up. It was amazing. I rang my mum straight away, and she'd felt it where she lived a few miles away. It was crazy. So, strange noises are, especially connected to earthquakes, such as these weird lights people sometimes see as well. It's fascinating. I love anything to do with tectonic plates and earthquakes. I just find anything like that just incredibly fascinating.
My husband and I went on honeymoon to North Devon when we were married, because we got married a year earlier than we'd intended to, because my mother was dying of cancer at the time and we were trying to get to the wedding. Unfortunately, she didn't make it.
Oh.
So it meant we had to take a sort of cheap honeymoon because we hadn't had time to save up. So we went to North Devon, and the week we were away on honeymoon, there was a small earthquake in North Devon, which we didn't notice, but it was reported in all the papers. Can you imagine how much rib taking we took when we got back for having caused an earthquake during our honeymoon? Bit keen, were we, dears? Yeah. People wouldn't let us live that down for about the first 3 or 4 years we were married.
Brilliant. Well, I think as well, I suppose casting your net a little bit wider as well, Ruth, you can see the similarities, but I would imagine you've already started to see some very strange differences, which I think you'll get when you look at even in this country. We can see the regional differences from southern England all the way up to the tip of Scotland. There are little nuances and beliefs. As we were talking about country magic and country knowledge earlier, there are these things that seem to be very much enmeshed in a local community or area that simply doesn't transfer. And because so many states in America are big places, really, you'll even probably get that kind of situation where somebody in the north of a state's belief system is completely different to what people in the south think.
And I'm already finding that there's quite a in touch with natural spirits. So I've already got somebody who's pretty sure they've seen pugwudgies in their garden, which is not something I ever knew existed until I read up on it.
Were they talking to them? That's always a bad sign. There's a terrifying documentary about that particular, which deals with a gentleman who had a pugwudgie experience outside the Hockomock Swamp, which is in the Bridgewater Triangle in the north of the US, which is a very notoriously area of high strangeness, Ruth. And there's a guy there who's interviewed who was taking his dog for a walk, and he bumped into a pugwudgie that was basically going ha ha ho, or worse that basically, and he realised it was saying "I want you."
Oh no. Yeah, you don't really want to be realising that out in the...
No, he stayed where he was and then went home.
Wise person.
Yes.
So yes, I'm already noticing that there's a more natural element to what people are experiencing. And then obviously there's not the same level of historical. In England, sort of any square metre of land on England has been lived on at some point, unless you're talking at the top of a mountain or the bottom of a lake. Every other bit of accessible land has been lived on at some point in our history, whereas America is so incredibly vast and has a much shorter human history. Even when you talk about the indigenous peoples, it's still a much shorter history than ours in terms particularly of volume of humans per square mile sort of thing.
Yes.
That there are huge trenches in America that probably no human has ever set foot on. Ever. And I think that changes the nature of what's being experienced, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just from what little people have been talking to me about so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's proving to be a very interesting experience, and I hope everybody enjoys it when the book comes out.
Well, I can't wait for it, Ruth. I'm really looking forward to some of these stories because, as we've said before, I've seen some of the most hair-raising encounters I've ever read in the covers of your books, and so I'm very intrigued to see what tends to happen. I think because sometimes the problem with stories from the States is people either try and do a massive book. And because there's 50 states, it's just it's lots and lots and lots of things get missed. But I think with the way you work and the way you try and source your stories, I think it's probably going to be a lot better for all of us that we've got these bite-sized encounters that we can look at rather than buying a specific. And as I say, because some states are so big, you can buy a book about a certain state's ghosts, and it'll only cover certain parts of the state. You won't get the bits, and sometimes it's the little places where the best things are happening.
And I always, my books are very predominantly written around people's own personal encounters that I speak to myself.
Yes.
Either in person or by telephone or by video link or by, email or letter or whatever. But I personally have spoken to the person about their encounter. And so what you get in my books is encounters that have never been published anywhere else because these people haven't ever talked to anybody else about it.
Yes.
Alongside ones that have been talked about elsewhere, but you do get a huge number of first time ever put down on paper encounters. And that's kind of what I specialise in is finding what, the ordinary Joe blogs is experiencing by persuading people to talk to me by going out on social media. And it's labour intensive, I can't tell you how many posts I've put out and how many times I have to answer them and what have you. When people write and either have got something disparaging to say or you know, or whatever. But there's all sorts of responses I get, and of course there's only that, you know, a small handful have actually experienced something.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of work to winnow it out, but I think it makes for good reading then, because you've got people's own genuine experiences rather than just, you know, a rehashing of people say that such and such a state is meant to have whatever, you know. You know, I'll start with that, but then I'll narrow it down to somebody who's actually experienced something there, which I think is kind of more interesting in a way.
No, definitely. Absolutely. I was thinking that the other day when I was watching a Bigfoot documentary, where the best thing about it was witnesses, and then the majority of it was people talking about what they think's going on. Well, I'm not really bothered what you think, because it's just a theory. Just let's hear the witnesses. I want to hear how they felt, what they could smell, what it looked like, that kind of thing. I'm not really bothered about whether you think it's a portal or an alien or a lost hominid. Everybody's got a theory on where it's coming from. I want to know what people experience. That's the thing that always excites me about people's strange experiences in the paranormal, be it seeing a strange light in the sky, or living with a ghost, or seeing a strange creature that's not supposed to exist. That's where I love them. That's one of the great things about your work, Ruth, is always these are stories that most of them have never been published. Most of them would never have seen the light of day until you popped up. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I pop up annoying people with all my ghost posts, as I call them, when I put a request out on social media.
Yeah, well, long may it continue. So, Ruth, where can everybody get your previous work? And hopefully, when will the next volume be available for people to bolster their Ruth Wylde book collections?
And it is turning into a collection, isn't it? Book number 9, this will be.
Yeah.
So I predominantly sell through Amazon, so you can get them as an ebook or a paperback, or you can read them for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. But you can also get them from other major online book retailers. You can ask your library to pull them in. They can be pulled in that way. But they're available from all the big stores as well, are all listing them. So you can really get them for wherever you want to. Just ask that store to pull them in, and they will do. If they don't already stock them, which some do. But yes, so mostly Amazon is where I sell directly from. Or if you want a signed copy, just get in touch with me and we'll arrange something. I can do that as well. And I'm so easy to find, because I think I'm the only Ruth Wylde in the world with the Wylde spelt the way I spell it, which is Wylde. Because every time I Google it, I've never found another one. So
yes, there are strange things like that. The company I work for employ 131,000 people. I am the only Paul Bestall in the business.
Ah, there you go.
But it's not that rare a name, which is even stranger. But anyway, I digress.
I think it's the combination, because I have the 3 names that makes it, unique.
Very much so, and I'm glad it does. It makes you far more noticeable.
Long may that continue, eh?
Indeed. Well, Ruth, I cannot wait for the next book.
Well, hopefully it'll be out in time for Christmas, but only if I pull my finger out. So you never know. Get it on your Christmas wish list.
For 2 reasons, I'm looking forward to this new book. 1, I'm looking forward to reading these stories, and 2, I'm looking forward to speaking to you again about it later in the year, or maybe even early next year. So
definitely.
I can't wait for our next chat. It's not going to be as long as it. I can't believe it's 9 months. It's probably the longest we've gone without speaking since your first appearance, I think. So let's hopefully get something. We will speak hopefully within the next 6 months. And thank you as always for your fascinating thoughts, experiences, and sharing some stories with us today.
It's been my absolute pleasure as always, Paul.